Set during World War II, the novel reveals how far effects can be how war affects both individuals and society. War as temporary economic relief, the war brings job, especially in factories and the military, offering a short-lived escape from financial hardships. Patriotism versus survival. Some, like Emmanuel, enlist in the army out of duty, while others, like Azarius, see it as a way to earn a stable income. The war economy provides temporary solutions, but it does not address the deeper issue of long term economic inequality. Azarius, despite his anti war stance, considers enlisting just to support his family, showing how poverty forces people into choices they wouldn't otherwise make. There can be job crafting and aspirations. There is Florentine's search for a better life. She works at the 5 and 10 store but dreams of upward mobility through marriage. John Levitsky, self made aspirations. Unlike Florentine, he actively shapes his professional path, trying to climb the social ladder. But his lack of empathy for the poor makes him an unsympathetic character. Azaria's failure to adapt, he resists stable employment, always chasing unrealistic dreams, ultimately failing as a provider. There is family and there is sacrifice. We see that number of times Rosanna as the ultimate sacrificial figure. She embodies the struggle of a selfless mother who continuously puts her family's needs above her own, even at the cost of her health and happiness. Unlike his wife, Azarias represents irresponsibility and misplaced dreams, reinforcing traditional gender roles where women bear the burden of survival. There is parental love versus economic realities. Despite their best efforts, parents like Rosanna cannot change their children's destinies due to financial constraints. There is hope and disillusionment. Florentine's romantic hopes versus reality, where she initially sees John Levitsky as a savior, but is ultimately rejected and settles for Emmanuel. War as a false hope. Many believe that the war will bring prosperity, but it only delays inevitable suffering. Reality and dreams. Almost every character faces disillusionment, whether in love, work, or social mobility. There is naturalism and determinism. Inspired by Emily Zola's naturalist tradition, Roy suggests that characters are shaped by external forces beyond their control, particularly poverty, war, and social class. The lives are shaped by their surroundings with little opportunity to break free. Florentine, Rosanna, and Azarias all make choices, but these choices are dictated by necessity rather than true freedom. The novel hints that Florentine's children may also be trapped in the same cycle, emphasizing how hard it is to escape one social class. The final image of Rosanna walking with her baby, struggling to carry on, symbolizes the inescapable cycle of poverty and women's endless burden in patriarchal societies. The Tin Flute is a critique of social inequality, portraying how war, poverty, and rigid class structures dictate human destiny. While there are moments of hope, the novel ultimately suggests that true change requires more than just individual effort. It requires structural transformation, and more or less, we come to understand that Born Here the Occasion, which is translated as the Tin Flute, it employs omniscient narration, moving regularly among three equally important settings, that is, homes, the streets, and public establishments. The chapters are unified in several different places as a reader surveys the thoughts of several different characters gathered together by point of view as he or she follows an individual from place to place and by a process of transfer as the reader shifts from one center of consciousness to another after two characters have met. The constant shift of setting and the amount of action set aside The home convey the degree to which the characters are socially and psychologically dispossessed. The characters do possess their district in a sense, and it can be seen as an extension of the home, but the situation is double edged. Except during the Lacassie's abortive trip to St. Denis and some irony glimpses of prosperous Westmount, the novel never leaves the district. The parade of soldiers tramping off to war and death signifies one of the few paths of escape, and the surrounding mountains and spires suggest rampant. Ironically, the repeated images of trains and ships have realistic significance in the acrid smoke, the noise, the soot they discharge, but they do not fill their conventional function as symbols of freedom, except as a grim joke. The penultimate image of the novel of unambered dance would form the occur quite quizzed set branches towards where a tree in a backward, its branches tortured among electric wires and clothesline, its leaves dry and shriveled before they were fully out, symbolizes a little heavy handedly both the tragedy and the limited truth of these characters in a social environment in which they cannot flourish and from which they cannot flee. The tin flute divides itself into two parts roughly. The first is where Florentine and John Levesque figure more. The second is where Rosanna, Florentine, and Emmanuel figure more. The story develops on a threefold level, that of the individual, the social, and the global. At the first level, the center is Florentine. At the second level, it's Rosanna. And at the third level, the effects of the World War take over. Overall, there are 33 chapters, and all of them represent a passage, and each and every chapter introduces some of the other character, where we come to talk about the structural part of it, where one part of the novel is oriented more towards Florentine and the other is more towards Rosanna. Jean Levesque is absent from the part in which Emmanuel makes his presence felt. So the story is beautiful, and we come to talk about the theme of the Teen Flute now. Thematically, the Teen Flute deals with the lives of the little people of Montreal and the effect of the Depression and the war on their lives. The poor and the francophone Montreal suburb of St. Henry is brought into focus. The unprivileged inhabitants of this Montreal district and the strategies they come up with to cope with the harshness of their lives are portrayed with care and accuracy. The value of courage, camaraderie, and the perseverance is stressed throughout. The society the characters are caught in is an urban and inhospitable industrial society. The period is around 1939. The novel is an urgent and moving portrayal of ordinary people caught in an inhospitable urban industrial society. It succeeds because it embodies it then in fresh, accurately observed sensory details. St. Henry is a grimy factory district in which the slums are hemmed in by soot covered railway tracks and by the Lachine Canal, which is also slimy. There are lines of shabby clothing. Few men cannot find jobs. In the tawdry caves, young men discuss war or sit by the jukebox. We are told about Ma Philibut's restaurant store that this store has always been the refuge of a noisy, squabbling group, usually penniless. There are few excerpts that I would like to read from page number 32 and 33 of the novel. He stopped in the middle of Jane Henry Square, a vast area furrowed by the railway and two street cross tracks. A crossroad planted with black and white posts and level crossing gates, a clearing of asphalt and dirty snow, often between bell towers and domes to the assault of howling locomotives. The peal of the great bells, the rapid streetcar gong, and the unending traffic of the Notre Dame and St. James Street. Almost every night now, adding to the anguish and darkness of St. Henry, came the distant tramp of heavy boots and the roll of drums, sometimes coming from Notre Dame, sometimes from as far away as the armories up on the heights of Westmount when the wind blew down from the mountain. The district of St. Henry does in itself come to lay a claim to become the protagonist of the tin flute. The atmosphere that is established at the start of the novel through the detailed description of the restaurant bustling with activity helps in establishing an ambience. Roy does it with great accuracy and economy and is unsparing in underlining the grimy aspects of life being portrayed. This is Roy's way of introducing her characters whose identities are essentially derived from their environment. The diverse reactions to war expressed in the Tin Flute emphasize the complexity of the society portrayed by Roy. This is an important aspect of her realism. One can also say that thematically, Roy illustrates the emotional impoverishment caused by financial hardships. In their own need to survive, the characters have become indifferent to universal suffering as exemplified by the war. Even Rosanna, temperamentally the most compassionate of the characters, has learned to be sparing of her sympathy, preserving it for the many demands of her immediate family, and even there forced to look after to the physical rather than emotional needs. Florentine more tragically feels that the gentleness in the shape of her beloved but unreliable father has blighted their lives, and she has resolved to expunge such emotions from her life. Roy reveals in place of sentimental notions of the ennobling effect of poverty, how need makes Rosanna Monterarily mean and calculating the how one's money is lacking, the strong ties between her and her husband Azarias are strained. By Roy's account, the driving force behind the tin flute was indignation at the waste of human energy and hope observed in Saint Henry. The novel's function in impelling social change is underlining in her 1947 address, Retour à Saint Henry, in which he describes the sense of futility for the author who observes the repetition of those miseries which earlier demanded documentation. The Tin Flute deals with the unfortunate poor in Montreal. It focuses on the Lacasse family and other ordinary people and their essential humanity, warmth, togetherness, and courage. It brings out these squalid conditions quite well. Now, major themes in the Teen Flute are those that explore deep social and psychological themes that reflect the struggles of the working class in the wartime Montreal. There is poverty, there is social inequality, there is cycle of poverty, there is lack of social mobility, there is contrast between classes, and there is war, its impact on society, which is set in World War II. The novel explores clearly how war affect both individuals and the economy. And there is patriotism versus survival, where characters like Emmanuel enlist out of duty while others like Azarias consider it simply for financial security. There is a false promise of prosperity. War offers short term benefits but does not fix the deeper issues of economic instability and social injustice. There is a Florentine's despair for escape. There is John Lewisky's self made success, Zaria's unrealistic dreams. There is a theme of family, love, and sacrifice. And there is also a hope and delusionment. So overall, Roy's Tin Flute is not just a novel about individuals, but it's a critique of systemic poverty, war, and gender roles. It highlights how society traps people in cycles of hardships, making true escape almost impossible. So we are done with Unit 15, and right now we begin with Unit 16 that talks about the characterization and technique of the tin flute. And in this we study the Objectives of studying why we need to study it include at the first place. Then we study about the technique in the tin flute. We talk about urban social realism in tin flute and naturalism in the tin flute as a technique that is discovered. And at the same time, we understand that handling of the character in the tin flute and the narrative technique which is employed by Roy in this novel, and the excerpts which are used, especially um, are so focused on two lives, that of Rosanna, like I say, which who's gentle, harassed, and determined mother of 10, scheming to manage a crammed and impoverished household and expecting yet another child, and that of her oldest daughter, Florentine. So we're going to study all of them. Gabriel Roy's The Tin Flute or Born Who the Occasion is a masterful example. Is a masterful example of a realist and naturalist fusion together. So it's a landmark novel in Quebec literature, known for its urban social realism and naturalist approach. It offers a stark depiction of working class life in Montreal's Saint Henry district during World War II. It illustrates how economic hardship and environmental forces shape human destiny. Urban social realism is a literary movement that focuses on the daily struggles of the working class in the urban settings. And Roy has masterfully employed this style to portray poverty, social inequality, and the impact of war on Montreal's lower class residents. Roy's novel is deeply rooted in the real geography and atmosphere of Montreal, particularly the St. Henry's district. She's meticulously describing the crowded, unsanitary homes, cold winters, and polluted streets, which creates a vivid portrait of urban poverty. There is St. Henry as a symbol of hardship, where the district represents economic struggle, overcrowding, and social stagnation, contrasting with wealthier areas like Westmount. There is the influence of the city. Unlike traditional rural Quebec literature, the Tin Flute shifts the focus to urban survival, portraying how the city shapes its inhabitants' lives. Rosanna, exhausted and pregnant, wanders through the city, struggling to feed her children, demonstrating how the urban environment exacerbates suffering. The struggle of the working class, Roy's depiction of the working class experience, is one of hardships, resignation, and fleeting hope. There is a low wage jobs and exploitation. Florentine works at the 5 and 10 store, earning meager wages that do not provide a path to financial independence. The role of women like Rosanna bear the brunt of poverty, managing large families while their husbands struggle to find stable work. Love is often secondary to economic survival, where Florentine marries Emmanuel not for love but for financial security. War and economic transformation. While war is usually associated with patriotism, Roy represents it as a temporary escape from poverty. Many men enlist not out of nationalism but for a stable income. War jobs provide relief, but the systemic poverty of St. Henry remains unchanged. The harsh reality of social class, where hard work does not guarantee a better future. Poverty is a cycle. John Levesky represents those who have escaped poverty yet looks down on those still trapped in it. The novel subtly critiques a system that fails to provide real support to the working poor. The final image of Rosanna, tired, carrying her newborn through the streets, reinforced the inescapable burden of poverty on the urban working class. Realistic depictions of Montreal's working class struggles. that also emphasizes on economic hardships, low wages, and survival-driven decisions. Naturalism is a literary movement which is influenced by determinism, the idea that human behavior is shaped by heredity, environment, and social conditions. In the Tin Flute, Roy applies naturalist techniques to show how poverty and circumstance dictate the character's life. Human life is controlled by external forces. The characters in the Tin Flute are not in control of their destinies, they are shaped by forces beyond their control. There is poverty as an inescapable trap. The Lacasse family struggles illustrate how economic hardship is inherited and nearly impossible to escape. The characters are forced to adapt to war conditions with little say in the future. Florentine wants to rise up the working class status, but her options are limited by her environment, forcing her into a pragmatic, loveless marriage. Roy meticulously shows how the urban setting shapes people emotions, decisions, and dreams. St. Henry breeds desperation. The bleak streets and the overworked families create a world where hope is fragile and survival is the priority. John Levesky, once poor, becomes ambitious and cold, rejecting Florentine because she represents the lower class background he's trying to escape. Lack of free will and power of circumstance, unlike in romantic or idealistic literature, Roy's characters do not have the luxury of choice. Florentine is forced to choose security over passion. Rosanna continues having children despite her suffering, as contraception is not an option. Azarias fails not because he lacks ambition, but because the economic system does not support men like him. Naturalism often explores how social conditions repeat across generations. Florentine's children will likely struggle just as she did. Rosanna's endless sacrifice mirrors that of many women before and after her. Naturalism in Tin Flute, where the characters are shaped by environment and social class. Free will is just an illusion. The cycle of poverty repeats across generation. Urban setting influences emotions, behaviors, and survival strategies. Gabrielle Roy masterfully blends urban social realism and naturalism to create a novel that is both a deeply personal story and a broader social critic. Through detailed realism and naturalist approach, the Tin Flute highlights the brutal realities of poverty, the false hope of war, and the limitations imposed by class and environment. So, these are some of the important points that we discussed in the characterization and technique part. And now let's discuss some of the important questions from Unit 15 and Unit 16. Important questions from Unit 16, especially. Who are the main characters in Tin Flute? Who are the main characters of the Tin Flute? Who emerges as the most arresting character from among these? Comment on Roy's handling of hardships of the poor people of the St. Henry district of Montreal, and comment on the special brand of Roy's realism. So the main characters in Tin Flute and the most arresting character, Gabriel Roy's The Thin Flute or Boyhood the Occasion, features a range of characters who represent different aspects of poverty, ambition, love, survival in wartime Montreal. Main characters would be Florentine Lakissa, the young woman working at the 5 and 10 store, desperate to escape poverty, torn between love for John Lewinsky and financial security with Emmanuel. There is Rosanna Lakissi, Florentine's mother, burdened with the hardships of raising a large family in poverty, the symbol of maternal sacrifice. There is Azarias Lakassi, Florentine's father, a dreamer who cannot hold a steady job, causing further struggles for his family. John Lewinsky, an ambitious, self made man who has escaped poverty but remains emotionally detached, rejects Florentine due to her lower status. Emmanuel Letourneau, kind hearted soldier who loves Florentine, Though she does not love him, she marries him for stability. Daniel Lacasse, Florentine's younger brother, who is sick with leukemia, representing the fragile nature of life among the poor. Now, who can be the most arresting character? I think it's Rosanna Lacasse. Of all characters, Rosanna Lacasse has to be the most arresting character who emerges as the most poignant and emotionally arresting figure. She embodies self sacrifice, tirelessly working to keep her family together despite constant hardship. Her resilience in the face of suffering makes her the heart of the novel. She symbolizes the struggles of working class mothers trapped in poverty with no escape. The most striking moment of the novel, where it ends with Rosanna carrying her newborn child through the cold streets, exhausted but still persevering, a powerful image of the endless cycle of poverty and maternal endurance. Comment on Roy's handling of the hardships of the poor in St. Henry. Gabrielle Roy does not romanticize poverty, instead, she offers a raw, unflinching depiction of how it crushes dreams and dictates lives. Key ways she portrays hardships, detailed urban realism, the overcrowded homes, hunger, and brutal winters create a suffocating environment. There are poor families which lack basic necessities, and even small luxuries symbolize fleeting joys. Emotional and psychological toll. Poverty forces people with painful into painful choices. Florentine marries for survival. Rosanna endures illness pregnancies. Azarias avoids responsibility. The novel highlights the exhaustion, frustration, and despair of people trapped in the system. The illusion of escape, war, jobs, and military service seem like opportunities but offer no real way out. Florentine believes love or marriage can save her, but she is ultimately resigned to a practically but uninspiring future. The cycle of poverty continues as seen in Rosanna's final image, carrying yet another child in an uncertain future. Roy's realism is powerful because she presents poverty as a structural program, not just personal failure. The poor are not lazy, they are trapped in a system that gives them few choices. Comment on the special brand of Roy's realism. Gabriel Roy's realism in the Teen Flute is distinctive because it blends social realism, psychological depth, and naturalism. What makes Roy's realism unique? It's a deep personal human perspective. Unlike political or ideological realism, Roy's approach is emotional and intimate. She focuses on individual struggles, making her characters deeply human and relatable. Unflinching yet compassionate portrayal. She does not glorify or pity her characters, she presents them as they are. Even flawed characters, Zarius, John Levitsky, are not villains but products of their environment. Detailed, almost cinematic urban realism. The streets of St. Henry feel alive, filled with hunger, noise, and desperation. She captures the texture of life in wartime Montreal, from factory jobs to army recruitment centers. A naturalist influence like Emily Zola, Roy suggests that people are shaped by forces beyond their control: poverty, war, class, etc. Characters do not have full free will, they must make the best of limited choices. So, these are some of the questions from Unit 16. Now, if we talk about the questions from Unit 15, important questions can be: which two parts can the action of the tin flute be divided into? The main two parts of the tin flute, the action of the tin flute can be divided into two rough parts, each reflecting different phases in Florentine's personal journey and the broader social themes of the novel. Part 1, where the struggle of poverty and dreams of escape come up. The section focuses on Florentine's life in St. Henry, where she works at the 5 and 10 store. Her desire to escape poverty is central, and she romanticizes John Levitsky, seeing him as a way out of her circumstances. Meanwhile, her family's hardships, especially Rosanna's sacrifice and Azaria's failures, form the backdrop of this section. Jean flirts with Florentine but ultimately rejects her, seeing her as beneath him. There is a part two, which is a disillusionment and harsh reality, where the section sees Florentine's dreams shattered as John coldly dismisses her. In desperation, she turns to Emmanuel Dr. New, a kind soldier who uh, offers her security rather than passion. She marries him not out of love but for financial stability, a choice dictated by her circumstances rather than free will. The war effort creates temporary prosperity, but Roy suggests that the cycle of poverty will continue, especially through Rosanna's struggle. The thematic side of the tin flute, what it can be the thematic side of the tin flute. The novel is rich in themes with poverty, social determination, war, and love versus survival being its most significant. Poverty and social determination, where the novel shows poverty as a cycle that is difficult to break. Characters like Florentine and Rosanna struggle to change their fates but are trapped by their circumstances. The gap between the rich and the poor, that is John Levesque versus the Lacasse family, highlights social inequality in wartime Montreal. War as both an opportunity and an illusion. The war offers economic relief through jobs and military service, but this is temporary. Azarius enlists not out of patriotism but because he has no better options. The government and wealthy society members remain detached from the suffering of the poor, even as war benefits some economically. Florentine dreams of love with Jean, but love alone is not enough in her reality. She settles for Emmanuel, showing her economic necessity dictating personal choices. Rosanna's love for her children is evident, but it is also a source of endless suffering as she can barely provide for them. The role of women and maternal sacrifice. Women in the novel bear the brunt of poverty, making sacrifices for their families. Rosanna is the ultimate figure of endurance, embodying how women's struggle in poverty are often overlooked. Florentine's arc suggests that women's futures are often dictated by the men they marry, reinforcing human inequalities. The tin flute is divided into Florentine's hopeful illusion and her forced acceptance of reality. Thematically, the novel explores poverty, war, survival over love, and the struggles of women. Gabriel Roy represents a realistic and deeply empathetic portrait of working class life, making it a cornerstone of Quebec literature. So, we are done with Unit 15 and Unit 16, and we are done with Tin Flute. We meet in the next class, that is uh, we meet in the next class, that is on 3rd of March. So there will be a timing change. I will be taking the class at 7 to 8 in the evening, and we will start with the next block. The block would be block 5, the English patient, which has again 4 units to be covered. And this is unit 17 that we will be studying on Monday. Canadian South Asian diasporic writing, where we talk about the introduction, the diasporas in general, the diasporic criticism, conclusion, and questions. So that is what we are going to study in Unit 17, followed by Unit 18 that will discuss soon after we are done with Unit 17. Now, Unit 18 would be on Datsy, life in walks, and mostly we will be focusing on the English patient. So, thank you so much. Have a great evening. Thank you.